Hi friends, I'm Chelsea and I am here to talk about my favorite books that I read in 2024. Yes, it is finally time to talk about my top 10 books plus some honorable mentions. I don't know why I've been putting this video off. I think as an indecisive person, it was really hard for me to come up with this list because I really read a lot of good books last year. I had a really hard time ranking them, and it's also kind of hard for me to talk about books that I love. I feel like it gets repetitive. Sometimes it feels like it's easier to talk about the books that you don't like because there's very distinct reasons, but with the books that you love, at least for me, usually I'm like, I loved it. It was great. It's hard to put it into words sometimes, but I am excited to talk about these books. I thought I'd give you a couple of quick little stats if you're interested in that, and then jump into my honorable mentions and then my top 10. Just a couple stats here. If you don't care about this, you can skip ahead. I'll have timestamps in the description. But in 2024, I read 100 books, which was great. My goal was 75, and once I had surpassed that, I kind of pushed my goal up to 100, so I was able to reach that. And I only have 3 DNFs, which is pretty successful. I'm not afraid to DNF. I really only had 3 books that I really did not want to finish, although there are several that I wish I had DNF'd. And as far as pages read, I read 40,973 pages, which is a lot. My average rating was 4.2 stars, which is great. The average book length was about 405 pages. And as far as like the medium in which I consumed books, I listened to 43 strictly audiobooks, 30 physical or ebooks, and then 28 were immersion reading, whether I listened and read at the same time or going back and forth between physical and audio, depending on what I was doing. So that was something that I tried in 2024 that I had never really done before, and that really helped me get through more books. And that's pretty much it. So these honorable mentions are not in any particular order. I did rank my top 10, but a lot of them, especially towards the top, could be interchangeable. So just know I love all of these books, and I don't really have any strong feelings as far as like my top book or my top 5 even. These honorable mentions are just as I pick them up in my stack. And I'm not going to give very in-depth synopses. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it because I have like 15 books here to talk about. So the first one in my honorable mentions list is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, a cozy, heartwarming middle grade classic that I had never read before. I was familiar with the story a little bit, but I'm very glad I finally read this. I listened to the Audible version narrated by Rachel McAdams, and that was a really great experience. I just fell in love with Anne Shirley. She is such a funny, precocious, whimsical, free-spirited, stubborn, fiery, just all the things. She was so fun to follow, and I really enjoyed seeing her journey, showing up in this family as an orphan and kind of being unwanted and unloved, but then growing to be part of this family and this community. It was just a really sweet story of family, friendship, kind of a coming-of-age story following Anne as she gets into some shenanigans and watching her grow. I also really enjoyed the writing. There were some really beautiful nature descriptions. It was just very slice of life, not anything fast-paced or intricate as far as the plot goes, but just a lovely slice of life little story zoomed in on this girl and her family on Prince Edward Island. And yeah, I highly recommend it. The next one is a duology, and I loved both of the books, but especially the second book. But I'll hold up the first book because it's probably more recognizable. And so this is the Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig, so One Dark Window, but I enjoyed Two Twisted Crowns even more. I still don't know if it's young adult or new adult or just adult fantasy. It didn't feel young adult to me, but it is a gothic fantasy with some romance there. And this one had such a unique magic system, unique world, very misty, atmospheric, great for fall and winter. The magic system uses something that resembles tarot cards. So pretty much in this kingdom called Blunder, there is an infection. You can only cure it by finding all of the cards in this deck, and they're scattered throughout the kingdom, and there are several different people who are trying to gather these cards together for different reasons. But the main character, Elspeth, she is trying to heal her infection, and if you're infected by this magic, you are in danger because it's not allowed, and the only kind of magic that is allowed is the use of these cards, pretty much, the Providence cards. parts. Another interesting element of this is that Elspeth has this monster in her head. That's the way her infection or magic has manifested. She talks to him, he's trapped in her head, and that was a really interesting element. I really liked him as a character and just their dynamic and the way that his story kind of grew into the second book without spoiling anything. So really unique, interesting, atmospheric. I really liked the romance in both books. The characters were not standout to me, but the magic system, the world, lots of twists and turns and all that really kept me captivated. And this one felt like just a quick, easy read and one that I recommend for people trying to get into fantasy. So this was a fun one. The next one is a very popular contemporary romance that probably a lot of people have on their top list, and I don't own it yet, but it is Funny Story by Emily Henry. And I think this became my second favorite of hers after Beach Read. I just really loved it. I always love her writing. She just does such a good job of creating a really good romance, but also having different things going on in the characters' lives apart from the romance, and also just really funny, witty banter. And I thought all of that was present in this book. The main character, Daphne, her fiance, decides that he's in love with his childhood best friend, who happens to be dating Miles, the male main love interest in this story. And so Daphne and Miles are suddenly broken up with at the same time because their exes become a couple. Daphne and Miles end up living together because Daphne's looking for a place to live. They become roommates, kind of get to know each other as friends, and then a romance blossoms. There's also a little bit of fake dating here because they're trying to make their exes jealous. So there's a lot of drama, a lot of funny things that go on, but also some depth with these characters and their own journeys. Miles reminded me of Nick Miller from New Girl, and I absolutely love him, so that was really fun. I enjoyed Miles a lot. Love their banter, but also love their friendships and family dynamics, and yeah, it was just a really fun time. Definitely recommend. Next up is another book in a series, and this won't come as any surprise to you. This was on my top 12 list, but I decided to narrow it down to top 10, so sadly this one didn't make the cut, but it was really close to being in my top 10, and that is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. Book 2 in the Emily Wilde series. I loved both books, but I liked this one more than the first book. That seems to be a theme for me sometimes. And so this is cozy, historical fantasy with a little romance, not a huge romance element, but the way it was done is just perfect to me. The first book follows Emily, who is a curmudgeonly scholar. She's working on an encyclopedia of fairies, and she goes off to this foreign land to study the fae folk. At the same time, her academic rival, Wendell, comes along with her. He's like her opposite in every way. There's a little romance there. Their dynamic is hilarious. And so in this book, I won't spoil the plot, but basically they link up again to work on her map of the Otherlands, and they travel abroad. They have some friends that tag along with them too, so we have some new characters in this book that I really enjoyed, along with Emily's dog, Shadow. Definitely slower paced, lower stakes, not anything action-packed or twisty in any way, but just a fun time. I love the historical elements, and I love Wendell and Emily's dynamic, and both of these books have really great nature vibes, good atmosphere. I really enjoyed the setting of this, definitely more of kind of a fall setting, and it felt like the plot moved a little more in this one. It wasn't as slow. It still had its slower moments, which is why it didn't make it to my top 10, but it definitely had more going on in the second book, I think, and I'm really excited to read the third book in the series. And the last book on my honorable mentions list is another one that was on my top 12, but when I moved it down to top 10, this got booted, but it's high up there on the honorable mentions. And this is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. This is a young adult contemporary social justice book, and this follows Star Carter, who is kind of torn between two worlds. She lives in this Black community with her family, but she goes to a very predominantly white prep school, so she's caught between two worlds, and then her life kind of flips upside down when her best friend is murdered by a police officer. He's unarmed. It just goes into the fallout of that, and Star is involved in kind of the trial. It's definitely a heavier one. Made me angry for sure because a lot of it felt very real and not very far removed from what happens in our current society. But while this was very heavy and powerful, it also had its funnier and more lighthearted moments. I loved Star and her family. The audiobook for this was great too. It was really well done, brought it to life for sure. And yeah, I just think this is such an important read as it felt like a very real portrayal of injustices Black people and other minorities face on a day-to-day basis, and how the legal system deals with cases like this where they are killed unjustly. It's just very eye-opening. Since it's young adult, it's fairly easy to read, but it didn't feel super young besides the fact that high schoolers are the main characters in this book. Highly recommend checking this one out. Okay, we are into my top 10 now, and again, these are ranked, but I love them all. They were all 5 stars, so don't take my ranking too seriously. So in my 10th spot is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, a contemporary romance. I didn't expect to have multiple romances on this list, but I really love this book. I really enjoy Abby Jimenez's writing and want to check out more of her books. This is the 3rd book in the Part of Your World series, which I really do recommend reading in order, but this was my favorite book in the series. I felt like it ended so well. There were a lot of little nods to the first 2 books that really made more of an emotional impact on me. I really loved the 2 main characters. The premise of this is that Emma and Justin, they both meet on this Reddit thread, and they both have the same curse where the last person that they dated goes on to meet the love of their life pretty much, and so they have never found their person, and they kind of connect over that. A relationship blooms over time, but they also have things going on in their lives. I think that's what makes a romance stand out to me, when it has a great romance, great chemistry, great characters, but also there are other things going on in their lives apart from the romance. This just had so many elements. Justin basically becomes a single dad, and so we have these kids involved, and Emma is dealing with some trauma and some relationship issues with her mom. She also has her best friend with her. She's a travel nurse, and so she visits this town where Justin lives for a little bit of time. I really enjoyed the friendship and the family themes that were explored both with Justin and Emma's relationships. It just felt really real. I was very emotionally attached. I laughed out loud, but I also cried, and I just loved Justin and Emma's relationship. It felt very honest, very mature, good communication, just very real, and I connected with both of them a lot. It was just a really sweet romance. Coming in at spot number 9 is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This was a reread for me this year, and I bumped it up to a 5-star on the reread. This is just such a comfort read for me at this point. This is just literary fiction, and it follows 3 main characters, but specifically Tova and Marcellus, who is an octopus, which is really the main reason I love this book, but I do love Tova as well. So Tova, she works the night shift at the aquarium. She's an older woman who has lost her husband, and she is dealing with the grief of that, but she strikes up an unlikely friendship with Marcellus, the giant Pacific octopus, who has a very short lifespan, and at the same time she is trying to figure out what happened to her son, who disappeared mysteriously many years back. So we kind of have a little mystery here, but mostly it's just exploring these characters and their relationships and what is going on in their lives. This is just like a warm hug, so wholesome, very cozy in the setting, but also in the themes. It does have kind of a melancholy tone because it deals with death and grief and things like that, but it also feels lighthearted and hopeful at the same time, which I really liked. Marcellus is like an all-time favorite character for me. Just any kind of sentient creature or animal always ups the rating for me of a book. I wish he had more. He does have his own chapters and perspective. They're just hilarious. He's very full of himself and convinced that humans are inferior creatures. I just love his comments on humanity, and I just loved his relationship with Tova. This felt like a story of loss and sadness, but also of hope and how family can be found in the most unlikely of ways. And this was a great audiobook too. So number 8 on my top 10 list is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was like the 3rd book I read last year, so very early on. This was just such a fun time. It is a standalone, which is great, although it's in the Cosmere, so there are some nods to his other books, which I didn't understand because I hadn't read really any of his books before this. So I'd like to reread it and see kind of what Cosmere nods I find now that I've read more. This is kind of like the reverse of The Princess Bride. We have the main character Tress, who goes off to save the boy that she likes. He is kidnapped by an evil sorceress, and she somehow just ends up becoming a pirate in her quest to rescue him. She's a very unassuming, kind of meek, quiet, just a simple girl. She has a cup collection. She's definitely not an experienced pirate. She kind of gets thrown into this, and this world was really interesting because the sea is not made of water. It's made of spores, and if it rains, the spores will like explode into these vines that can then overtake anything. So like the ship would get crushed probably, or if you get caught up in that, you probably get killed. So very high stakes as far as the pirate journey. I just loved Tress as a character. I feel like she grew a lot over time. Loved seeing her dynamic with the crew and just all the different people that she met along the way. Really funny, lots of witty moments. I know some people don't love the humor in this or Sanderson's humor in general, but I liked it. I thought it was quirky and whimsical while also being just really fun and adventurous with an interesting world as always. Just a really fun pirate story that's super easy to read and just a fun time. Next is a book I don't own but am on the hunt for because I obviously loved it. This is number 7 and this is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. So this is a literary historical mystery, very much a slow burn, character driven, not a thriller, so don't go into it expecting a thriller. I luckily did not. I kind of knew it was going to be on the slower side, so I think that kind of kept my expectations correct and made me really enjoy it. And so the premise of this one is it's set at a summer camp in the 70s. Pretty much we find out right away that the daughter of the owners of the camp goes missing. It starts right off with that, trying to figure out what happened to her, but then we discover that years ago her brother also disappeared. There's a lot of tension and mystery behind trying to figure out what is going on with their family, why these kids have disappeared. Just a lot of family drama in general, lots of different perspectives from people at the camp and different family members. Also multiple timelines. It jumps back and forth a lot, and I know that can trip some people up, but I always love a good multiple timeline, multi-POV situation, and that really worked for me. I felt really invested with all of the characters, really. Lots of stories of women here who are undermined, who are not given a say over their lives, who are just dismissed and not taken seriously. And so I enjoyed kind of the conversation around that and really felt for a lot of these women. The setting was great. I felt like I was just right there the whole time at this camp in the Adirondacks. Very vivid, immersive, a great summer read, I think. And I felt like every character was just so intentionally placed within this story and had a role to play within the larger narrative. I did really like the mystery. Again, it's not fast paced, but I liked all the little reveals, all the little twists and turns and things that we find out along the way. I really thought the ending made sense and was satisfying and just had a really good time with this. Did not want to put it down even though it was like almost 500 pages. So definitely recommend checking that one out. Okay, number 6 is yet another contemporary romance. Who Am I? I finally found some that I really like, and this might be my new all-time favorite romance. So there's that. And that is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This had been on my list for so long, and I'm so glad I finally read it. I read it in June, which I highly recommend. This one follows 2 writers, Shane and Ava. They met when they were younger, and they spent a week of passionate love, and then we discover that something happened. They don't talk to each other for 15 years, I think, and they suddenly see each other at this literary event in the present day as adults. They talk, they spend some time together, and they discuss some of the reasons why they didn't talk to each other for this long, and we uncover a lot of what actually happened in the past while also discovering the things that they're dealing with in the present. It was just done so well. I really like the format of this because it starts on a Sunday, I think, and it goes through the days of the week, like 7 days in the past and in the present, and kind of jumps back around. I thought that was done really well. I just love these characters so much. I felt so attached to them and their struggles, their journeys. They're dealing with a lot, both in the past and the present. Definitely a lot of heavier topics in this, including addiction, chronic pain, family trauma, racism, and just being Black in the literary world. Definitely an emotional read, not a light romance read for sure, but that just made me connect to it all the more. I love the maturity of their relationship in the present. I felt like they were just really real and, again, communicative. I think I said that about Just for the Summer, but it's really true. I also liked the writing in general and just the bookish elements of this. This one is a heavy hitter for sure, but I highly recommend checking it out if you like a more emotional, heavier, but really real and relatable romance. All right, we are in the top 5. Pretty much all 5 of these books, I could just point at one and be like, that was my favorite book of the year. And so number 5 is Pure Nessie by Susanna Clarke. This one, I don't even know what genre, magical realism, fantasy, mystery, literary. It kind of defies genre norms and is really hard to talk about too. I mentioned it before, but this is when you don't want to know the plot of. I didn't know the plot, and while I was confused for like the first 50 pages, I caught on, and then it just went in a direction I was not expecting. Very dreamlike, hypnotic. I think those are some of the words that are used to describe this book. Very mysterious, not a fast-paced mystery, but you're just uncovering little things throughout this book. So I just recommend going into this blind and just being along for the ride. I read it super quickly, which it is short, but I did not want to put it down. I was thinking about it when I wasn't reading it, and I just had to know what was going on in this book because things are not as they seem. You're confused along with the main character, and it's just really hard to put it down because it's just wild. It's wild. I don't know how else to talk about it. So I love the sense of mystery, the main character, Piranesi, and just discovering this world. Basically, his world is this house full of never-ending rooms, like a labyrinth, and that was really unique to me. And Piranesi was definitely a kind of quirky and interesting character that I enjoyed following. The book is in his journal entries, so that was kind of a cool format to read in. And I love the shortness of it. It felt perfectly paced and like it didn't need to be any longer or shorter. Just really a perfect book in my opinion. So highly recommend checking out Piranesi if you haven't yet. In spot number 4, we are going back to my roots of historical fiction, and this was definitely a favorite of the year, clearly. So this is The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. I felt so many things while reading this book, and I think if you are not a historical fiction person, but if you want to get into it, this is a great one because it has 2 different timelines. We have one character in the present day dealing with modern things, and then we do have another perspective and timeline set in World War II in Poland. I think having that modern perspective helps to not feel as much like you're bogged down in the historical elements, but the way those stories intertwined and interacted was just so well done to me. And so the character Alice, who is in the modern day, we follow her. She is a mom of 2 children and a wife to a husband. That was a weird way to say that, but she's kind of struggling with her relationship with her husband and her son as well. So he is autistic and nonverbal, but also her grandma has had a stroke, I believe, or some condition where she can't speak, but she has a system where she can communicate through like this device. We know that she grew up in Poland, but Alice does not know much else about her besides that, but she's trying to figure out some things about her past. So while at the same time, the other perspective is Alina, who is in Poland in the 1940s during World War II. The Nazi occupation starts to happen in her village. Her family is impacted by it, and it follows her story as she deals with that. So again, a theme for me is that I was so attached to these characters. I felt like the writer just really brought out very real struggles in both timelines, all the emotions. I definitely cried multiple times, felt so connected to their stories, and was not expecting their stories to go the way that they did. There were lots of really unexpected twists and just some beautiful moments in here, really heavy with it taking place during the Holocaust. I know there are so many World War II books, so a lot of people might be sick of that, but this one being set in Poland, I feel like was a different perspective and just such a powerful story of resilience, finding the truth, fighting for your family, and fighting for what you want in life. I also really liked that a lot of this was based on the author's family history, and a lot of the places in this were real, and she talks about that in her author's note at the end. I thought the characters were really well fleshed out, but also just really great pacing, great writing, plot, and just great emotions. Everything all around I loved. Okay, we are in the top 3, and I will say it again, these top 3 could be interchangeable, so this order should not be taken too seriously. So coming in at number 3 though, really is a whole series, but I'm going to pick my favorite book from the series. This won't come as a surprise to you. It is The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, but my favorite book that I read so far is Words of Radiance, the second book in the series. I really loved all of them. I've given them all 4.5 to 5 stars. I haven't read the 5th book yet, but I have a good feeling. I've talked about these so many times. Really, it follows 3 main characters in this vast world called Roshar, where there are these really intense storms that kind of dictate the landscape and so many things about the politics and just practical things in this world. We have a scholar, a political leader, a slave, a soldier, lots of different types of characters. Their stories are introduced in the first book, of course, but they converge a lot in the second book, and that was really satisfying to me to see where their stories went and to see a lot of these characters meet each other. I just love the world that he's created. It's very interesting, very intricate, lots of political, religious elements, but ultimately just really great characters who I could relate with, who I felt for, who I was rooting for. Just so many twists and turns, amazing plotting, amazing storytelling with a very straightforward writing style, although the magic system in the world is very intricate and complex, but it doesn't feel difficult as you're reading it. Even though these books are long, they really do go by quickly. I just wanted to keep reading to uncover more things about this world and these characters, lots of backstories and things that give you insight into why they are the way that they are. And this book in particular was very action-packed, lots of big moments, lots of satisfying character moments, amazing found family. I'll just say Bridge 4, if you know, you know. And it just really solidified my excitement to keep reading this series. It is a slow burn for sure, don't get me wrong, but it's totally worth it. And these are really fun to listen to on audiobook as well. So again, please read these books, even though you're intimidated, because I'm sure you are, but it's so worth it in the end, and I'm just loving it. This next one is another complete series pretty much, but I'll just hold up the first book. Although the first and third book were both 5 stars for me, and I don't know which one I loved more. I had a really hard time picking between this one and the #1 book. But here is my second choice, and that is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. The whole series is Beartown, Us Against You, and The Winners. I really loved The Winners as well. I thought that was such a great wrap up to the series, even though it was really big. It was like 600 plus pages, but I felt all the things while reading that and loved it, but I also really loved Beartown. So hard to pick a favorite in the series. Again, I talked about this so many times, so I'm not going to go into much depth on the plot, but this one follows multiple characters in this small hockey town that really relies on the hockey team to thrive. And so there's a lot of pressure on these boys on the hockey team, and they are coming up on their semifinals where they're really hoping to win. But right after the semifinals, a violent and tragic act occurs that kind of sets the town reeling and figuring out where they stand and where to go from here. Then the series continues from there. This is another one where we follow multiple characters, lots of POVs. It jumps around a lot. I really loved that, and I still felt attached to pretty much every character, even though we do jump around a lot. Fredrik Backman just does such a great job at writing about emotions and every possible topic you can imagine, from parenting and marriage, motherhood, coming of age and growing up, sexuality, the toxic culture found in sports. This one does deal with sexual assault and rape, so definitely some heavier themes. He just does it so well, brings out the empathy and compassion of humanity, just really makes you think and feel, and I just love it. And I also love how he does bring humor and levity to these heavier topics. It's kind of hard to explain it if you haven't read his books, but he does such a good job of that. And while I don't love hockey, I even got a little invested in the hockey stuff at times, although that's definitely not my favorite part of the book, and that could be a deterrent for some people, but he even got me invested in the hockey somehow. It's another one where I laughed, I cried, and I just rooted for these characters so much. I love Benji and Amit, the whole Anderson family, and so many others. These are great audiobooks as well, so I just can't recommend this series enough. Okay, we are at #1 somehow, and I'm just so grateful that I read all these books because I really love them all, and this one will also not come as a surprise to you. This is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I finally read it. I had been putting it off for so long. I read both books in the duology, which I loved Crooked Kingdom as well, but I think I like this one even more. I'm just so glad I finally read these. So these are young adult. They don't feel very young adult, but they are technically young adult fantasy set in the Grishaverse, which is a whole big thing. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I know a lot of people ask, like, should I read Shadow and Bone before I read Six of Crows? I don't really want to, but I don't want to be confused. And what I did was I read the first Shadow and Bone book. I didn't love it, but I did get a little sense of how this world works, how the magic system works. I didn't continue the series, and I had also watched the Netflix show which combines Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, so I was already a little familiar with Six of Crows and just the world in general. I recommend doing that. You could read the first Shadow and Bone and watch the show. It didn't bother me having already watched the show before this. I think it was different in some ways and similar in others that helped me enjoy this book, but you don't have to. You could also just look up the magic system of the Grishaverse, and I think you'll be fine to just jump in on this without reading Shadow and Bone. So that was a lot, but I know a lot of people ask about it. This is pretty much a heist story. We follow this criminal prodigy named Kazbrecker. He kind of has this group of people that he gets together to pull off this deadly heist. It's a very unlikely group of people, and they're all morally gray and criminal in some ways, but they are pulled together for this, and they really become a family, and I really do love the found family in this book. We have a convict for a thirst for revenge, a sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager, a runaway with a privileged past, a spy known as the Wraith, a heartrender using her magic to survive the slums, and a thief with a gift for unlikely escapes. I just loved all of these characters. Again, what makes a book stand out to me is how much I feel for the characters, and so definitely loved their dynamics in this book. But I also love Leigh Bardugo's writing. It's just hard to describe it, but it's so smartly written, great banter, great dialogue, very witty in some ways, but kind of dark and gritty. Great atmosphere, really interesting magic system. A lot of their magic is inspired by the elements, and people have different abilities, and they're kind of in different categories according to what elements they control. I just loved the journey that these characters went on, both physically as they pulled off the heist, but also just emotionally. We get a lot of their backstories and really grow to love all of them, or at least I did. There is some romance in this. It's a very small element, but I thought it was done so well. I loved it. I specifically love Kaz and Inej so much. Really liked how their story ended in the second book as well. There were a lot of really funny moments with some really good banter, but also some heavier moments, again, with their kind of backstories, emotional moments with the characters and between characters, and also lots of very action-packed, high-stakes things going on with the heist. I felt like this read like a movie, very engaging. Loved the loyal friendships in this, kind of the slow burn romance feel, all the scheming and plot twists, the writing, the magic, everything. I loved it so much. And so that's why this is my favorite book of the year. I have said it many times, but please check this out if you haven't read it yet. So this is going on longer than I thought, but I guess I really do like to talk about the books that I love. And so I hope I sold you on some of these. I really did have a great reading year and can't wait to see what new favorites I find this year. So as always, let me know if you've read any of these books, if you had similar thoughts, or if you didn't quite love them as much as I did. Of course, tell me what some of your favorite books were from last year. And as always, thank you for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.